She worked in the case of Radovan case delivered by the ICTY on the last 20 March. His previous sentence has been extended to life imprisonment, and we think it's a great day for the accountability of genocidal crime. She will deliver upon her experiences in the ICTY court to prosecutor for genocidal crimes. Now I would like to request Nicole to give a public lecture on prosecuting genocide experiences of ICTY. Nicole.
Hello. Thank you very much. It is a great honor for me to be here today. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'd like to thank Mofidel and Ehsan and also Nita, who have been such extraordinary hosts. I had just a phenomenal tour today of the Liberation War Museum, and I am really, it is heartwarming and extraordinary to see the work that is being done here. And I think it really is a testament to the efforts to obtain justice in this country and also to inform the rest of the world about what has happened in Bangladesh. I'll also admit that I'm humbled being here, as my own legal education in the US, which was focused on human rights law, and it was now nearly 15 years ago, but at the time there was no reference to what happened in Bangladesh in 1971, or for that matter, most of Asia. It's really a sad state of affairs. It was a sad state of affairs as to what the legal context was that we were introduced to. And fortunately, that's changing. I think students now are getting a very different legal education. But I also want to emphasize that what's being done here is having tremendous effects around the world, and I hope all that are involved recognize their contributions, and please know that those of us who come are really taken by what is being done here. So thank you very much. And I have about 30 minutes to present, and I have a lot that I'd like to present. I am extraordinarily passionate about the work that I did at the ICTY. It was a transformative experience for me. It remains very close to my heart. And of course, this past week was a tremendous week with the appeals judgment in the Karadzic case being issued and the change in sentence. And I'll speak a bit to that, but in order to ensure that everybody here also has a foundation from which we can discuss, and I am hoping that there will be some time for question and answer, I'm going to go through quickly just some foundational concepts and then identify a few key lessons learned from the ICTY, and then we can elaborate and discuss those further. So beginning, this here is the ICTY building. It's now the MICT building. It's a residual mechanism is what remains, because the doors to the ICTY technically closed last year, but there remain cases that are ongoing. This is the building that is in The Hague, and this will give you a sense of what the inside of a courtroom looks like. Much of the Karadzic case was tried in this courtroom, as were other cases, several other cases, including some of the other cases I worked on related to the Srebrenica genocide. So in 1993, the tribunal was established. This is the Security Council resolution. It was established by a UN Security Council resolution. And the particular language here highlights that there was an international tribunal established to prosecute persons responsible for serious violations of international humanitarian law of the former Yugoslavia. And at the time, they identified January 1991 as the start date. At this time, in 1993, the war in the former Yugoslavia had already been ongoing for a while. The war in the former Yugoslavia, and this is a map to highlight where this took place. Those, as you can see, it's Europe, and then the pink area, that's the area that was the former Yugoslavia. In 1991, war broke out in that region, and atrocious crimes occurred. Images that harken back to World War II concentration camps came out to the world, and there was very much a call for the international community to act. And it was only in 1993 that finally the international community took action. That action was the establishment of this tribunal, and many argued that it was the international community wanting to be perceived as taking action in the absence of actually doing anything on the ground. And that remains an ongoing debate about this establishment of this tribunal. But the tribunal itself was the first tribunal. It was an ad hoc tribunal, but it was the first tribunal to try international crimes at an international level since the Nuremberg and Tokyo tribunal. So it was a major moment for international justice. This is a close-up of that area of the former Yugoslavia. The red is Serbia, and the blue is Serbia now, and the blue is what's now Bosnia-Herzegovina. Those are the areas I'd like you to focus on. And here is a map of what it looked like in 1995. The red, the very big red patch, that was the area that was Serb controlled. Serbs were a predominantly Orthodox population, and Milosevic, President Milosevic, was the leader of that area. Then if you look in that Bosnia area, you'll see that it's both red and gray. It was a mix of being held by Bosnian Serb, so the red is Bosnian Serb, again, Orthodox community, and then the gray was the Bosnian Muslim-held territories. This is a map of 1995. As you can see, there are a few small pockets of gray in the midst of a lot of red in that Bosnia area. Those were safe zones. Those were areas that the UN declared as safe zones for Muslims. And in the one that has the arrow to Srebrenica, there were approximately 40,000 to 60,000 Bosnian Muslims in that area. In July of 1995, a decision was made by the army that belonged, because there was Serbia that was run by Milosevic, but the red that's after that zigzag line, which is the border there, that comes into the gray, that mixed portion, that was an area known as the Republika Srpska, and it was that the president of that was Radovan Karadzic. And that army, the army associated with that portion, decided to take the enclave, to take Srebrenica, and those gray patches were in strategic locations. They were near a river that meant that it had very fertile land, and it was also in the middle of these other areas that were all Serb-held and Orthodox Serb-held, and there was a desire to kind of keep it clear of Muslims. And so for that army, they viewed it as a very strategic location and decided to take the enclave. They no longer wanted to respect what the UN had established. So they decided, and one issue was that there was, although those area safe zones were supposed to be demilitarized, that meant no guns, no arms in them, in fact, there were some arms. So there was, throughout the time that those zones were established, from 1993 to 1995, there was firing and fighting both from outside in, from the Serb side, and from the Bosnian Muslims inside out. But the arms, the weight of arms, the strength of the arms, who had more power and the ability to do more, was definitely the Orthodox Serbs on the outside. So in July 1995, there was a decision by the army to take that enclave. What happened was that the people in those areas took two actions. The women, children, and elderly men decided to all flee to the UN compound and try to have safety there. The Muslim men, younger men to middle age, and in fact a few elderly men and a few women, feared that they would be killed if once the troops came in. So they decided to form a column, and the estimates are between 10,000 and 15,000 individuals joined that column, and they walked and fled. They wanted to flee on foot to gray area to the Bosnian Muslim-held territory. So once that army operation began, those two things happened. Women and children went to the area that was by the UN. Men and boys predominantly fled in the column. Once the army took the enclave, there were, for the women, children, and elderly men, there were several steps that were taken. In Potocari is the name of where the UN base was. The women and children were separated from the men. The women and children were placed on buses. And for several days, it took several days, numerous bus trips, they were bussed out. The elderly men there were some younger men, were separated, held in a location, and subsequently they were killed. Now, at the same time, the column was fleeing. The army was firing on the column. And there were certain points where it was very difficult for the column to pass without being shot at or being too exposed to the army. And over time, many thousands of men were captured, and eventually also many thousands of men decided to surrender. Those men were also subsequently killed in operations that lasted several days, and were buried in mass graves. Eventually, over time, the world population the international community started to get word that this had happened. But there was tight restriction on the ability of people to come in. So what happened was there was a continued effort by the international community to get more information. And in order to cover their tracks, the military decided in September, so again, the operation occurred in the middle of July, and they decided in September, when things were really getting heated in terms of people wanting to go in and find bodies and find out more about what happened, to have a reburial operation. And so the army coordinated the activity of digging up many of the original mass graves and moving the bodies to other secondary graves. So this we call this is the crime base. This is what happened in Srebrenica. And at the court, the prosecution's argument was that there were key individuals that perpetrated these crimes, that were the leaders of the army, the political officials, leaders of the police, and those individuals committed serious crimes, and for this activity they were charged with genocide, with murder, extermination, persecution. So the full gamut of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and violations of the Geneva Conventions. So my first case when I joined the ICTY was the Popovic case. This was a case involving Srebrenica. It was specifically focused on the events of Srebrenica. And these are the individuals. It was a multi-accused case, which raises a lot of very interesting due process issues. And those are issues that you see here in this country as you're prosecuting crimes as well, international crimes, and you have multiple accused. But this involved members of the military, of the police at different levels. At the very top level of the main staff, middle level, and also the ground operations. When Radovan Karadzic was arrested, myself and another attorney were pulled from this team to then work on the Srebrenica component of the Karadzic case. Because Karadzic was the president of the former Republika Srpska from 1992 through to 1995, he was charged not just with Srebrenica, but with 3 other large groupings of crimes. He was charged with the crimes from 1992, all of the ethnic cleansing campaigns that took place, the crimes that basically gave rise to the outrage that led to the formation of the tribunal. He was charged with the siege of Sarajevo, the bombings and shellings of Sarajevo. He was charged with the Srebrenica genocide, and then he was also charged with hostages, the UN peacekeeper hostage taking. So Radovan Karadzic was originally indicted in July 1995. It was technically after the Srebrenica events, the killing operation concluded. He was indicted on the 24th of July, 1995. However, his indictment wasn't for those crimes. It was for the original indictment, was only for the 1992 activities. And this is what he looked like around the time of his indictment in 1995. He evaded arrest for 13 years. And when he was arrested, this is what he looked like. He had assumed an alias. His name was Dragan Dabic, and he became a new-aged healer. He was when he was at the time of his arrest, he was in Serbia, in New Belgrade, and he was lecturing in the public. He was going out to bars and drinking and singing and living a very developed outward life under this alias, giving very public lectures. And because people often ask about the gray on the top of his head and what that is, I just have this side view. So you can see that he had grown his hair very long, and it was a ponytail, and he had pulled it up. There was often a lot of talk about the hair of Radovan Karadzic, because it is, and he was very proud of his hair, and remains so, I think, today. So he chose, while on the run, to grow it out. But this was him when he was arrested. Now, I just want to go quickly through the timeline of the case. So in 12 May 1992, that's when he officially became president of an entity that was the Republika Srpska. Because remember, before 1991, when the war broke out, all of those areas were the former Yugoslavia together. And he was always a very important political figure in that Republika Srpska area, but he actually assumed a formal position of power in 12 May 1992. He was charged, the crimes he was charged for were actually from October of 1991, because the argument that the prosecution made was that he was of such a high level in the political party that he was already controlling activities and engaged in planning from even earlier than this. But just so that you had in your minds a sense of when he kind of assumed official position, that was 12 May 1992. 24 July 1995, the indictment was filed. He wasn't arrested until almost 13 years later, 2008. And as you can see, there is a massive gap between when he was arrested and 2016, when the trial judgment issued. And then there's another 3-year gap, almost, where the appeal is underway, and then the appeals judgment, like I said, just came down this past Wednesday. So if you look at from the time of the indictment, the original indictment, to his appeals judgment, it is an extraordinary amount of time, 24 years. And that, we'll talk a little bit later about the lessons, but this is something very critical to keep in mind in terms of the way that international justice functions. Now, what was happening during that gap? There was, after he was arrested, there was a need to develop a new operational indictment. Already through the years, the indictment had been revised. When more information about Srebrenica came, even before he was arrested, there had been a revision to the indictment charging Srebrenica. But once he was arrested, then there was a massive effort to update the indictment to ensure that it was fully comprehensive and was consistent as well with the ICTY jurisprudence and other trials that had come down. And that was, this pre-trial period was what I was most actively engaged in. It was the part where we were defining the crimes, again, looking at what he had done and investigating. So it was an extremely interesting and extraordinarily busy time, though it may not seem that way because of all the time that passed, but it in fact was. You can see that the opening statements began 26 October 2009, so a little over a year, year and several months, a few months after he was arrested. But then the start of the prosecution case didn't begin until April 2010. There were delays because of disclosure violations. Karadzic decided to represent himself, which is an option at the tribunal. That presented a lot of issues as to just how the procedure would be handled and what fair trial would look like for somebody who's self-represented. The end of the defense case was May 2014, and as you can see, there was again several months before there were closing arguments, and then several more months, years out, in fact, before the trial judgment issued. Now, when he was originally, when the trial judgment was issued, he was found guilty of genocide for Srebrenica. He was also found guilty of the crimes in Sarajevo. He was found guilty of numerous crimes charged related to the earlier 1992 ethnic cleansing campaign, but he was not found guilty of genocide with regard to that 1992 ethnic cleansing campaign. The only genocide conviction came from Srebrenica, and then he also was convicted of the UN hostages. Although he was convicted of being part of the criminal enterprise that perpetrated genocide, he was sentenced to 40 years at the sentencing, and that was what produced a lot of outrage in the communities, the affected communities, because they could not believe that someone could be guilty of genocide and receive a 40-year sentence. The appeals judgment that was issued this past week, that they had dealt with several grounds of challenge. They did overturn two very particular charges, convictions of Karadzic with regard to the killing of a particular individual at one location and two other individuals at another location detention facility in 1992, but the overall crimes for 1992 remain the same. Although the prosecution argued that he ought to have been convicted of genocide for 1992 on the facts that were presented at trial, the appeals chamber rejected that, so it basically maintained the convictions for the 1992 crimes. It maintained the convictions for the Sarajevo crimes. It maintained the convictions for Srebrenica and also for the UN hostages. But as to the sentence, the court decided you cannot be directly liable for genocide and not receive life. So he was sentenced to life. And the rationale for that was that several other individuals from that Popovich case were convicted of genocide and they were given life. So they said, how could those lower level officials be convicted of being a member of the same criminal enterprise and not be given a life sentence, and be given a life sentence, and Karadzic be convicted of the same crimes, have a higher role, and not be convicted or sentenced also to life. So that was the basis for the change. 20 minutes? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to go very quickly through the lessons that I wanted to learn because my time is running short. So the first lesson, international justice can require persistence and time. And in this instance, I feel like there's a saying in English that you're preaching to the choir. And I think in Bangladesh, I'm preaching in this audience, I'm preaching to the choir. That means the same people who are singing the same song I am, who are doing the same type of advocacy I'm doing, understand and believe this. But it's an important point to underscore. It's important because this is the type of message that needs to reach other people outside of this room. We're working with Rohingya who are seeking justice, and there needs to be an understanding that if there are trials, certainly if there are international trials, it will take time. And as you can see, even with a high-level perpetrator and a lot of resources, it was years and years once he was arrested to have his convictions upheld, or to be found and upheld. So, yes, time and persistence. Lesson 2, it's very important to utilize the full range of available and relevant evidence. I think if you walk upstairs in the museum, one of the most striking things to me about the galleries was the range of documents, of physical items, of course visual images, of videos demonstrating and illustrating what had occurred. Well, when we prosecute cases, we need to be drawing from all of those types of materials in order to establish the guilt or innocence of as prosecution, the guilt of the individual we've charged. It highlights two important things: this need to utilize relevant evidence. There are two types of categories of evidence that we talk about at the tribunal. We talk about crime-based evidence and we talk about linkage evidence. Crime-based evidence is all of the evidence that establishes what happened on the ground. So that's what because the individuals who are most responsible, we're looking at, you know, the high-level commanders, the political officials who are issuing orders and directives. Well, those aren't the people that are shooting on the ground. Those aren't the people that are driving the buses that are transferring the people out of the enclaves. So the first thing we have to do is establish all of those facts that occurred. That's the crime base. What happened? Tell the story of what happened on the ground. The second and the most critical and most challenging is establishing the linkage. That is linking the individual, the high-level official, to what happened on the ground. Because almost always, the high-level official will say, I didn't know that was going to happen. I thought the operation would take place, of course. And I get to, as supreme commander, or as the head of the military, I can dictate that certain operations, military operations, take place. But I'm not responsible for the fact that these individuals were rogue actors and went and executed thousands of people. That wasn't my fault. And so that's usually what we hear, this idea that, oh, they had no idea. So we have to establish, no, in fact, they knew. If we want to establish direct liability, they knew or were part of a joint criminal enterprise, a group of individuals with a common plan to carry out these activities, or we need to establish that this leader ought to have known. There was a basis for him to know, or her to know, and should have acted to prevent or punish what occurred. So, and now I'm just going to very quickly go through, just to give you a sense of the type of evidence that comes before the court. So these are pieces of evidence that were used in the Karadzic case. Here we had videos, and this is a still frame from a video of men being separated at Potočari near the base. So this is establishing the crime base, showing that the men were being separated, the men who were subsequently killed. We have images again from video of the belongings of people being gathered together, and we have other images where they're being burnt, as well as identity cards that were burnt, showing there was no intention or expectation that these people were going to be able to return to their homes or even survive. We also used aerial imagery. Right now we see with the release of the FFM's report for the Rohingya that they used a lot of aerial imagery to show the burning of houses and also the destruction of land. So in this instance, we used imagery to show buses that were carrying people to a location of execution. That's the Krivitsa warehouse. Here we have disturbed earth showing where bodies were buried. Then there's, of course, forensic evidence that was used. This was a mass grave that's being unearthed. And it's not just the bodies and the bones that we ended up using, but things such as this watch. That was a kinetic watch, and it stopped. And it stopped on Saturday the 15th. And these actions took place in July 1995, between roughly the 12th, 13th, and the 17th. So this helped to establish the date of those killings. And also, it was critical because there was some argument that the mass graves that were unearthed weren't from 1995, they were from 1992. And so this was one way to combat that argument. We also had, as I had mentioned, there was that reburial operation. Well, one of the primary graves had been very close to a bottling facility, to bottle water and drinks. And they used green glass for their bottles, and there was an area where they would throw damaged bottles, ones that weren't good enough to use. And just to let people know that there'll be an image that for some could be disturbing, and so if you don't like to look at or have difficulty looking at body images, then you may want to look away. But here is an image from one of the graves. This was a secondary grave, and in it we found fragments of green glass. The bottling facility was kilometers and kilometers and kilometers away from this secondary grave. But the fact that we found the green glass in the mass grave meant that we could link it. And we could show these bodies were from that location where the individuals were killed and originally buried. And then we used maps like this to show the relationship between various primary burial sites, and the secondary, the primary ones being the red ones, and then the secondary being the green dots. And the one with the bottle facility, that was Kozluk, the second dot down, and it got linked to the green at the very bottom. We also used orders. This was one issued by Karadzic, where he talks about making life unbearable in the enclaves. Here we would use daily combat reports, and that included, this one included reference to about 1,000 to 1,500 enemy civilians and soldiers, or this is a statement, about 1,000 to 1,500 enemy civilians and soldiers were arrested and killed. That's not supposed to be what happens. It would potentially be that these enemies would be killed, or that they would be arrested. But the way that this was worded, arrested and killed, we were able to argue was evidence of this operation that was underway. We also had intercepted communications, because the Bosnian Muslim Army was listening in to the Republika Srpska army. And here, there was reference to there being a big problem. There are big problems. Well, with the people, I mean with the parcel. And this was important because we subsequently had another intercept that said, by one of, the B stands for Beata. He was one of the individuals in the Popovic case. And he says, there are still 3,500 parcels that I have to distribute, and I have no solution. And we were able to explain to the court, based on the use of that prior intercept, parcels was code for people, distribute was to kill. And this was further evidence, because we could put this in context with other evidence we had, of their knowledge and their engagement in this operation. I took this picture today at the War Museum just to highlight these same pieces of evidence these same types of pieces of evidence are upstairs. So the curation of the exhibits upstairs is really a testament to the type of information and evidence you have here of the crimes that were committed. And this is a communication, a similar type of intercepted wire communication and discussion about the operation underway. So I just wanted to highlight that. There were several other instances of orders and whatnot, but I was really, I felt like this was a very clear instance of just how extraordinary the evidence and documentation upstairs is to indicate, because of course these are cases where we're finding accountability of an individual, but we're also creating a historical record. And for us, those types of documents were critical in creating the record what happened in the former Yugoslavia. Likewise, it is here. I also wanted to highlight quickly, there's our vehicle logs that we used, and we were able to show the movement of key people just based on the fact that in the Army you have to sign when a certain vehicle is signed out and where it's going and when it comes back. So sometimes some very kind of rote, regular documents are actually critical because it places key people, for example, Popovic, one of our accused, at, in this instance, an execution site, very close to the time of the execution. So just very quickly now to highlight the last two lessons, and I'm only going to state these lessons and we can discuss more if there's time allowing, but the third lesson I wanted to reference was that the legacy of a case is not just its outcome, but its process. So we really, of course, saw in the Karadzic case the importance of the outcome with regard to the sentence, right? What did make a big difference having this revision to the sentence, but also important for the long-term history and import of the case is the perception and the belief that this process was fair, that he, as an accused, had the opportunity to present his case. And of course, he argued he didn't. He argued that there were numerous procedural errors, but there is a detailed record of the court responding to those claims and explaining how each one of the actions that was taken satisfied due process. The court did find that there were two instances where his due process rights were violated, actually, in the appeals judgment. They found that the fact that he wasn't allowed to visit two sites when there was a tour of the sites of the crimes was a violation of his rights during the trial. but then the court went on to find that those didn't prejudice him ultimately because of other evidence introduced. But even that, the fact that the court recognized a violation of his rights is important for the historical record. And I think this in particular is what ties into what's going on here in Bangladesh with the International Crimes Tribunal for Bangladesh. That those cases, of course, I'm sure most are aware here that they're criticized often for due process violations and for the issuance of the death penalty, and sometimes for the responsiveness of the appeals judgments to the public outcries. And those are important considerations, and it is critical that up-and-coming lawyers and those engaged in those processes think through how to ensure the due process protection of the rights of the accused. But I also want to underscore that those cases, that tribunal, I'm of course not here and living here, but even from an outsider's perspective, the import of that tribunal, and I understand that there are two and the complicated functioning of each, but the role that has had in justice for international crimes shouldn't be disregarded, even if there are challenges and some shortcomings as to what's happened in the past. We've had shortcomings at the ICTY as well. So, it's important to remember that international justice is also a journey, and the effort to ensure due process protection and a fair and just trial is very important as the courts develop. And the last lesson I wanted to note is that a conviction is not the end of the story. So even though I'm a prosecutor, or was a prosecutor, now I'm doing a broader range of work, I want to emphasize that the prosecution, that is about individual accountability, and it's a critical component of justice. But justice is much broader. For a lot of victims, the fact that Radovan Karadzic was convicted, it holds symbolic and historical import, but it changes nothing about their lives on the ground in their day-to-day. In that they do feel some element of vindication of their rights, but they're still struggling to make it day-to-day. They do no longer live in the area that they called home. A lot of them are suffering from physical ailments. They're without family members because those family members were killed. And so when we think about justice, we need to think not just about prosecutions, though they are critical. We need to think also about other elements. And I know other members of AJAR have been here and talked about the transitional justice framework and the fact that there's the establishment of truth, which part of the court record helps to establish truth, but truth is so much broader than just what can be found in a court record, because the court record only pertains to the individual on trial, whereas the truth is the much broader history and legacy as we have here. Then there's reparations for the victims, and there's also institutional reform. So I just wanted to note that conviction doesn't necessarily result in peace. That's why I use this image of the dove, because the dove's looking down wondering, is the court really going to bring peace? Because even in the former Yugoslavia, we have a rise of nationalism now. And though there are these convictions, the absence of other changes means that there's a lot of question as to the long-term peace in that region. And I think that's true in many areas around the world. And again, something to keep in mind when working in this legal space, that even if you are a prosecutor or working very directly on cases, you need to be mindful of also the bigger picture and other ways in which justice can be achieved or supported. So that is my very quick presentation, although I know I ran a bit over time, but hopefully we still have a few minutes for questions, perhaps not. Yeah? Okay. Oh, no time. Okay. Oh, I'm very sorry. But from what I understand, I'll be around after. So if you do have some questions, hopefully there'll be an opportunity to come up and we can discuss in a more intimate setting. But thank you very much for your time and for, again, inviting me to be here. It's been a real honor and pleasure.
Thank you, Nicole, and you are requested to sitting with audience. সুধীবৃন্দ, আমরা আমাদের সাংস্কৃতিক অনুষ্ঠান পর্ব শুরু করব। আমি আগেই বলেছি যে আমাদের প্রদীপ প্রজ্বালন রয়েছে উপরে। তার আগে আমরা এখন গান শুনব। সঙ্গীত পরিবেশন করবেন ৭১-এর শহীদ অধ্যাপক রশিদ উদ্দিনের কন্যা, বাংলাদেশের বিশিষ্ট সঙ্গীত শিল্পী রুকাইয়া হাসিনা নীলি। তার আগে আমরা মঞ্চকে সঙ্গীত পরিবেশন উপযোগী করে নেবার জন্য বিনীতভাবে কিছুটা সময় চেয়ে নিচ্ছি। জাদুঘরের কর্মীদের অনুরোধ করছি মঞ্চকে সঙ্গীত পরিবেশন উপযোগী করে নেবার জন্য।
শুভ সন্ধ্যা। শুভ সন্ধ্যা। আজ 25শে মার্চ গণহত্যা দিবস। মুক্তিযুদ্ধ জাদুঘরের আয়োজনে আপনাদের সামনে হাজির হয়েছি। রফিক ভাই আমার বাবার নামটা একটু ভুল বলেছেন, রশিদউদ্দিন নয়, রাশিদুল হাসান। আমার বাবা ঢাকা বিশ্ববিদ্যালয় ইংরেজি বিভাগের শিক্ষক ছিলেন। 1971-এর 14ই ডিসেম্বর আমাদের বিশ্ববিদ্যালয় বাসার থেকে ধরে নিয়ে যাওয়া হয়। পাকিস্তান বাহিনীর যে পরিকল্পিত বুদ্ধিজীবী হত্যা, তারই নির্মম শিকার। আজ আমি আপনাদের সামনে দুটো গান গাইব। প্রথম গানটির একটু প্রেক্ষাপট বলতে চাচ্ছি, রবীন্দ্রনাথের গান। 25শে মার্চের পরে যে মুক্তিযুদ্ধ শুরু হলো, বাবা ইংরেজি শিক্ষক ছিলেন, কিন্তু বাংলা সাহিত্য, বাঙালি সংস্কৃতি এবং রবীন্দ্রনাথ তার প্রিয় বিষয় ছিল। যখন দেশে গণহত্যা শুরু হলো, বাবা তার ঘনিষ্ঠ বন্ধু, বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়েরই শিক্ষক, সবার কাছে বারে বারে ছুটে যাচ্ছিলেন কি করে মুক্তিযুদ্ধকে, মুক্তিযোদ্ধাদের এবং এই দেশের স্বাধীনতায় সহায়তা করা যায়। কিন্তু যত দিন গড়ালো, আস্তে আস্তে দেখা গেল মার্চ থেকে সেপ্টেম্বর মাসে তার জীবনে একটা দুর্ঘটনা ঘটল। তাকে বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ের তার রুম থেকে ধরে নিয়ে যাওয়া হলো এবং জেলে আটকে রাখা হলো। তার কারণ তিনি মুক্তিযুদ্ধে সহায়তা করছিলেন এবং এই কর্মটি তার যারা ঘনিষ্ঠ বন্ধু তাদের দ্বারাই সম্পাদন হয়েছিল। দীর্ঘ 12 দিন তিনি জেলে মানে নির্মম কষ্ট স্বীকার করে যখন বাড়ি ফিরে আসলেন, বাবা এমনিতে খুব বন্ধু বাৎসল্য ছিলেন। তখন মাকে এসে বললেন, আমি আর কারো সাথে মিশবো না, আমার সকল বন্ধুই যেন এই দেশের বিপক্ষে কথা বলছে, আমি বোধহয় একা হয়ে গেলাম, আমার একাই চলতে হবে। এবং বাকি যেই কদিন 14ই ডিসেম্বর 13ই ডিসেম্বর পর্যন্ত তিনি আর কারো সঙ্গে তেমন কথা বলেননি। বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ে গেছেন, বাসায় ফিরেছেন, লেখালেখির কাজ করেছেন, নিয়মিত ডায়েরি লিখেছেন এবং রবীন্দ্রনাথের গান তিনি সবসময় গুনগুন করে গাইতেন। বেশ কিছু গান সেই সময় তিনি বারে বারে গাইতেন, এই গানটি তার মধ্যে অন্যতম। যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো রে। তবে একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো রে। যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি কেউ কথা না কয়, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা, কেউ কথা না কয়। যদি সবাই থাকে মুখ ফিরায়, সবাই করে ভয়। যদি সবাই থাকে মুখ ফিরায়, সবাই করে ভয়। তবে পরাণ খুলে ও তুই মুখ ফুটে তোর মনের কথা একলা বলো রে। ও তুই মুখ ফুটে তোর মনের কথা একলা বলো রে। যদি তোর ডাক শুনে চলো রে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি সবাই ফিরে যায়, ওরে রে ও ভাগা, সবাই ফিরে যায়। যদি গহন পথে যাবার কালে কেউ ফিরে না চায়, যদি গহন পথে যাবার কালে কেউ ফিরে না চায়, তবে পথের কাটা ও তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা চলো রে, ও তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা চলো রে। যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি আলো না ধরে, ওরে রে ও ভাগা, আলো না ধরে। যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে, যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে, তবে বজ্রানলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে, আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে। যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো রে, তবে একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো রে। যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। এবার তোর মরা গানে বান এসেছে, জয় মা বলে ভাষা তোরে। এবার তোর মরা গানে বান এসেছে, জয় মা বলে ভাষা তোরে। ওরে রে ওরে মাঝে, কোথায় মাঝে প্রাণপণে ভাই ডাক দে আজ কেনায়ের ঘোড়া করে ঘাটে বাঁধা দিন গেল রে, মুখ দেখাবে কেমন করে। ঘাটে বাঁধা দিন গেল রে, মুখ দেখাবে কেমন করে। ওরে দেখুনে দে হাল তুলে দে, দেখুনে দে হাল তুলে দে, যা হয় হবে বাঁচিল রে। এবার তোর মরা গানে গান এসেছে, জয় মা বলে আশা তোরে। এবার তোর মরা গানে গান এসেছে, জয় মা বলে ভাষা তোরে।
ধন্যবাদ রুকাইয়া হাসিনা নেলিকে। সুধীবৃন্দ, এবারে আমরা সবাই মিলে আমাদের পেছনের যে এক্সিট আছে এদিক দিয়ে আমাদের ওপাশে যে সিঁড়িটি আছে দিয়ে আমরা ঠিক উপরতলায় যাব। আমাদের যে ভাস্কর্য অঙ্গন রয়েছে এবং তার পাশে যে শিখা চির অম্লান, শিখা চির অম্লানে সেখানে আমরা কাল রাত্রি স্মরণে, শহীদদের স্মরণে আমরা মোমবাতি প্রজ্বালন করব এবং মোমবাতি প্রজ্বালন শেষে আবার সবাই মিলে আমরা এই মিলনায়তনে চলে আসব এবং তারপর আমাদের সাংস্কৃতিক অনুষ্ঠান চলবে। আমি সবাইকে অনুরোধ করছি আমাদের উপরে শেখা চির অম্লানের চলে যাবার জন্য এবং সেখানে আমরা মোমবাতি জ্বালানো শেষ করে আবার এই মিলনায়তনে এসে আসন গ্রহণ করব। ধন্যবাদ।
সুমন